According to the writings of Abbot Adomnan of Iona, in the year 565 AD, when St. Columba went on his missionary journey to the Picts of Scotland, he came across a funeral held near the river Ness, which flows into Loch Ness from Loch Dockfor. When he inquired of the people just what had happened there, they told him that the dead man had been swimming in the river when a giant water beast had killed him by drowning him, even though they had all attempted to save the man by using a boat to reach him. Feeling compassion for the people under duress, St. Columba prepared himself for a fight and sent one of his trusted followers, Luigne Maku Min, to swim in the river while he waited to see if the beast would attack. Upon noticing the beast approaching his companion, Columba boldly stepped forward and made the sign of the cross and yelled at the beast, saying, "Go no further. Do not touch the man. Go back at once." Fearing the holy man's words, the beast went back under the water, and Luigne and the people were spared its wrath. Everyone, here we have the first surviving encounter with the beast that may very well be the same Loch Ness monster that we will be discussing today on Friday Night Frights. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, here with Systematic Geekology. We are the priests to the geeks, going to terrify you and instruct you on all the weird, unusual, fascinating, fantastical, and unexplainable things that may or may not lurk out there in the world around us. So, what is this all about, you ask? Well, I have been given the opportunity once a month to come here on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and wherever else this is heading out to in order to instruct you all on a lot of stuff I really enjoy, that being, of course, anything involved with cryptozoology, the paranormal. We'll be discussing in sequences. I should probably explain this first before I go on. Once a month, like I said, we'll be discussing one topic of discussion in 6 different categories. The first is what we're doing today with the Loch Ness Monster in cryptozoology. Next up will be the paranormal. The third will be religious strangeness. Fourth will be the weird and the unexplained. Fifth will be true crime. And sixth, our final pick and category will be ufology. So I have selected one topic for all of these, but to you, the good people listening to this, we will be setting up a poll on our Facebook group where you will be the ones to decide what I choose to do next. So give us your suggestions. Leave a comment down below. Just join Facebook and let us know that as well. Continue to like and share this on YouTube, and hopefully this can spread to more people to see what's going on in systematic ecology. We don't just focus on one thing. We don't focus everything on the movies we're watching or the anime or the video games we're playing. Sometimes we like to get a little weird, and that's what I'm here for. Sometimes I may have someone here on the show with me as a co-host, just helping out. Sometimes it may just be me running solo, and that's tonight. But, and all of that, we're going to get into some weird stuff, because tonight we're discussing my favorite cryptid of all time, which is the Loch Ness Monster, sometimes known as Nessie. I will probably be flip-flopping between the two tonight. I love both of those names. Pretty dang cool. For me, I started getting into stuff like this when I was a wee little lad at my grandparents' house. My dad, when he was a child, had bought a book, I believe it was by Daniel Cohen, if I remember correctly, where it went over cryptozoological stuff like the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, the Yeti, so on and so forth. And I was hooked. I had never heard of these things before. And my dad is one of those people, he's super into topics like this. So he and I have, on occasion, we've gone to our local library and we've looked at microfilm to see in the 1800s, was anyone reporting about, this giant cat that shouldn't be there, or a Bigfoot, or a lake monster, or a sea monster, what have you. And that can be a ton of fun. And it's something that we do share and bond over. So I'm really happy about that. So in regards to this, what am I doing? For the cryptozoology stuff, I'm going to be starting with a description of the creature in question, which, as you can see over time, if you've studied in this for any amount of time, not There's not one single declaration. This is exactly what it looks like, and this is how you should draw it when it comes up. So the Loch Ness monster itself, what is it described as? Well, unfortunately, like I said earlier, the descriptions vary quite wildly. Some have given it these more horse-like features to just try and say some we're kind of aligned with what we would look at as kelpies and stuff like that. So there's that. Other people give it a more of a gigantic serpentine or some other long lost aquatic reptile kind of feel. It is commonly believed that the creature itself can be anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40 feet long. It has been described as having various shades of green, of blue, gray. As I cough into the mic, so there's that. Green, blue, gray, and black colorations. Sometimes there's white involved, depending on who's discussing it. And like I said, other colors have been described as well, but these are more of the common colors that we see. Sometimes people also report it to be scaled like a reptile. Others have said it kind of has a sleek and rubbery skin, more akin to what a seal would have in some respects. Other times, the creature is reported to have a long neck, like a dinosaur or a giraffe. Others say that its head barely rises above the water. It has also been reported to have flippers akin to a plesiosaur or a seal. As you can see, there's not a lot of corroborating stories. This is precisely what the creature is going to look like. So even though something like Bigfoot kind of has there's some differences you can throw in, like, you know, the color of the fur and stuff like that. Nessie, on the other hand, it's all over the place. Like, the people have described seeing like a sea slug kind of creature. People have said it looks more like a dog or an elephant or a horse. And like I said, it's all over the place. And that's one of the things I have against it, is the lack of consistency in the sightings. Now, some of this is down to eyewitness testimony. And as we will see as the series continues on, eyewitnesses are not always the most trustworthy people in the world, even though they themselves will believe wholeheartedly this right here is what this creature is. It is exactly this thing. So, what does that mean for us? Well, some of this we're going to have to take on faith. Do we trust the eyewitnesses in question? Do we think that they're telling the truth? Or are they just liars trying to make a quick buck or to be seen as important because they've seen something strange and mysterious? Or do they really not know how to describe what they've seen? It's certainly possible. Now, where do I stand? We'll figure it out along the way. Let's get back to Loch Ness itself. What the heck is this place? Well, it's located in Scotland, in the United Kingdom. It is a little higher up in the Scottish Highlands. It has these weird, murky waters that could really pretty much hide anything. This is due to the large amounts of peat, which is something that really collects up there. And when it gets into the water proper, what it does is it makes it so dark and all of these filaments in the water that you really can't see more than maybe a foot in front of you sometimes a little longer than that, depending on where you are in the loch, depending on the concentration of that peat. So when you're swimming in the water, for all you know, there could be many opportunities out there for something fast and unknown to end up being near someone and them being none the wiser. So what is Nessie exactly? Let us ask a handful of the eyewitnesses that have lived to tell their tales, if these people can be trusted at all. Now, these are not the first eyewitnesses. That, of course, is our first surviving record, being that of St. Columba that I quoted at the very beginning of all this, which unfortunately was written about 100 years after he died by Adobe, which I mentioned earlier, the abbot there. So can it be trustworthy? Well, the further away from history something is recorded, the more likely it's not true. That's unfortunate. It's a part of history. But we also have to deal with oral storytelling. which is something that's passed down over time, and it's just now written there. Or that's the first time we have it actually written down that survived. So for all we know, this could have been written down exactly in 565 AD, when St. Columba may or may not have faced this mighty beast in the River Ness. So that's where we're at. So moving on to, once again, not the first sighting of Nessie, but one of the more important ones. And this being, of course, I'm combining two of these for a second here, just to give us an idea of everything going on. This would be George Spicer and his wife, and I could not for the life of me find her name. I was very upset. Maybe I was just looking in the wrong spot for all of this madness. So I do apologize in that regard. This woman does have a name, I swear. I just can't locate it. So they caught sight on July 22nd, 1933, of a very large beast while they were passing by Loch Ness on the road, and it came in front of their car. He described the beast in question as having a large body, about 4 feet high and 25 feet long, and it had a long, wavy, narrow neck that was slightly thicker than an elephant's trunk, and as long as the 12-foot width of the road that they had been traveling on. Now, that's quite the impressive beast, if this is true. Gotta say. Right there behind you, man. Kind of weird seeing that. He further described the beast as looking like a dinosaur, and that it had an animal in its mouth, presumably to eat, while it slid into the water and disappeared from sight. So what we have here is a very brief encounter. Him and his wife seeing this majestic creature, and apparently it's about to eat, and moving on from there, it just kind of left. So that's that. That's about the totality of it. Later on, we do have her get the Inverness Courier, which was, if I remember correctly, the main newspaper of the town of Inverness in Scotland, where we would get a report on this encounter, sparking the first mainstream story across the globe that brought more attention to Nessie and inspired people who had seen it before this date to speak up about it. Some of those sightings I mentioned earlier happened as, let's see, back as 1870s, if I remember correctly. And like most of these people thought, well, people are going to think I'm weird if I bring it up. So why would I ever do that? And now that other people are seeing it, they're using this as an opportunity to go, yes, I did as well. And like I said, I was just scared that people wouldn't believe me if I did that. So here we are. However, as is often the case, when something like this in the cryptozoology, ufology world gets more and more attention, you're going to have people who, number one, don't believe this happening in the first place. And two, people who are going to try and take advantage of it to become famous. That has its pros and cons. I, being of the sort, I described it on the cryptozoology episode we did for systematic ecology, so you can look that up on the podcast. I describe myself as a skeptic who wants to believe. It would be really cool if there was a giant monster of some sort in Loch Ness. Do I know if that's true? Well, we'll see as time goes on. We have to look at the evidence, draw conclusions from that, and then work our way from there. Because we can't just accept it as fact simply because someone says they saw something. And in fact, one of the things skeptics would bring up about the Spicer account is that recently, a couple of weeks before this, if I remember correctly, a new movie had just come out with an eerily similar scene. And that being the 1933 King Kong, the first of them. And there is a scene in that movie where there is a giant dinosaur-like creature who has something in its mouth and moves along. So are they inspired by this and say, man, wouldn't it be weird? Maybe they've heard some local legends at Inverness of there being a beast in the loch. And they said, oh, what if we make this story up and we'll screw with people and stuff like that? Could very well be true. I don't know where I stand on it, but I did want to bring it up to try and put all the facts together for everyone to make your own conclusions based on that. Is this something trustworthy? The fact that this movie was released very soon to where the sighting is, it's something that should be brought up in any debate. if you're trying to do this correctly, if you're trying to get all the facts and anything that could apply to what you're doing. Next up on our docket, we have Arthur Grant, which is the picture you see in a slide down there, an artist rendering of something else he did. I forgot to look for his because we will see in a second, he is actually capable of producing his own art. At 1 a.m., not too far away, a couple of months, I believe, after the first sighting, Arthur Grant was traveling on the roads near Loch Ness on his motorcycle when he stopped on the road after encountering a beast that completely dwarfed him and his motorcycle, almost hitting it head on. He claimed the creature had a very short head attached to a far longer neck. The creature saw him, looked in his direction, and then fled into the murky waters of Loch Ness. Being a veterinary student himself, Arthur was able to describe the monster as an amalgamation of a plesiosaur and a seal, and even himself provided a sketch of the creature. Now, this is what I find a little more plausible. I don't believe, if I remember correctly, looking at stuff this up, he was not drinking at the time. And if that's wrong, please correct me down below. The last thing I want to do is spread misinformation. He seems to be in his own mind, in his own spirits, completely sober. And seeing this on the road, it'd be very hard, even though it is late at night, to misidentify such a massive creature if what he's saying is true. Like some people I saw skeptic-wise were saying, oh, but it's just a seal that got into the loch, which is possible, and they have been seen. So remember that for later. I don't buy that completely. I think either he is inspired by the stories of people who came before him and then tried to make a hoax and have people look at him, or he saw something. And that one's a little more terrifying to me, if true. Next up on our docket, we have what you've probably all been waiting for, the most famous picture of Nessie in the entirety of our journey to figure out what the heck this thing is, and that being the surgeon's photo. This infamous photo, probably the most infamous cryptozoological photo of all time, was taken in 1934 by Robert Kenneth Wilson, who he himself was a gynecologist, so that's why they call it the surgeon's photo. It sparked so much more interest in the creature that had already been done by the newspapers before. However, it is my due diligence to tell you that according to members of his family, this is a fake. And more than likely, from the research that's been done, especially starting in the 1990s, we were able to digitally look at things a lot better than before. It seems that what Wilson did is hoax this to try and sell the picture and make some money. He created a figure of a plesiosaur-like creature based on earlier descriptions of the monster. Put the picture in a way and all the wooden stuff there to create the image of this so that its neck would seemingly raise out of the water, and it was slowly tugged in the water with a toy submersible, providing a way for it to be seen as moving forward, like it seems to be doing in the photograph in question. However, even despite all this, even despite seemingly members of the family saying that this is a hoax, there are plenty of people who believe this attempt to market as a hoax is not to be trusted, and it's just someone trying to cash it in, trying to cast aspersions on their old family, and they don't think they should be trusted. And what they've looked at, the original photos and the negatives, prove this to be a living creature. Conversely, some of the skeptics will look at that very same thing, and they kind of see what looks like this white outline underneath the water that very much correlates with the idea of this toy submersible or whatever the heck they use to make it a hoax. I did not ever want to see this thing as a hoax. This photo is like the holy grail of Nessie, of the Loch Ness monster, of cryptozoology in general. But when I go into this a little further, I think it might just be a hoax. This photo in particular, which is very upsetting. Very much not fun. But alas, that's where we're left. Do you have any other opinions on that? Let me know. Please. I would be more than happy to hear someone disagree with what I have to say and for them to back it up with whatever evidence they have that I did not find. So please leave that in the comments below as well. Next up, we have, skipping forward a couple of years, Peter McNabb. This will be in July 29th. This is 1955. So as you can see there in the photo, there are two humps in the water. He managed to snag this photo real quick, quite close to where Castle Urquhart, and I swear I should have looked that up before this, and I definitely butchered that. This is where that's located on the loch. It's a very famous location there. A lot of people really go to explore there too. A lot of times the creature has been reportedly seen in this area. So does it favor that part? Who knows? However, about 20 years after this, Roy Mackal, who's a very famous cryptozoologist, he looked for Nessie, he looked for the Michaela Mbembe in the Congo to try and figure out if that was a living, breathing creature. He tried to get the negatives and the original photo for this. And when he eventually received them, when he's doing his investigation, he discovered it looked like it had been doctored in some form. So in his eyes, that makes its credibility kind of lessen, which is kind of the case when you get deeper into some of this. Everything that looks, I mean, look at that right there. Doesn't that seem like it's a living, breathing creature that's just undulating in the loch, like this snake-like being? And yet, there's almost always something that puts a lot of a cloud of doubt on a photo like this and ruins it. Now, I should also mention, we're not getting into every single sighting of Nessie. We've skipped over a couple of them by this point. Like, I couldn't figure out how to show you the Dinsdale, which is just happening a couple years after this in 1960. Showing the video on this, I've been playing with StreamYard, so I'm still not 100% behind how everything works. So apologies for that. I would really like to show that because it's a very convincing video. If it's not just some boat or a branch or something like that that's moving at some weird speed, it seems to be a creature. But we will skip ahead a very long time to, and I do not have a photo for this in question, the 2018 DNA survey that was done across the entire loch. Now, this was done by several international researchers. They were attempting to see, well, if there's something in here, there's going to be traces left behind in the water, in the soil, and what have you. So why don't we see if we can sequence that? See if we can find what's going on there. If there's anything out of the ordinary when we try and see, okay, well, this DNA correlates to a fish. This correlates to, let's see, a bird, what have you. That probably would be swimming in a loch, which there's plenty. But what they found through very aggressive testing is that there was nothing out of the ordinary to them when it came to a potential large reptilian creature hidden within the loch. But they did find something quite fascinating, and that there were traces of what appears to be unknown DNA sequences of a type of eel that they quite haven't been able to identify fully. So I don't know about you, but that's quite compelling to me. So let us look at possible explanations for what this creature could be, of which there are many, because this has been widely reported since 1933, and there have been a ton of people. They're going to be the ones to solve it for good. We're going to send our sonar teams in there and show our pictures of what we saw. And could this be a tree branch? Could this be a trunk? Could this be a weird something moved in the water and it created this shape for a second from the dust and peat? Who knows? I mean, really, today, who knows? But let us look at some of those explanations. First, of course, being the most obvious, the one you've heard about time and time again, that of the Plesiosaur. Now, I got to say, if there's anything I really wanted this creature to be ever since I've been a kid, it's been the Plesiosaur. Why couldn't it be? Can you not just have this giant, majestic reptilian creature underneath the loch, surviving from an era of long ago? Isn't that just like one of the most romantic ideas in the world, of something so massive being hidden away in this tiny lake? Well, relatively tiny lake in Scotland compared to other more massive lakes. And Loch Ness does go fairly deep, though. But a plesiosaur. So, to my evolutionists out there, Plesiosaurs are assumed to have gone extinct millions of years ago, a very long time. I can't remember if it's 65 or if they came from an era before then. I should have looked that up. I apologize. Now, you have more creationists like me who think, well, it's still possible they could have survived after the flood and gone and thrived somewhere else and somehow ended up in this loch here. Now, points against, of which there are a lot. Whether you come from an evolutionist or a creationist point of view, remember, this is a giant reptile. And what are reptiles? Reptiles are cold-blooded. So that means if Nessie is a plesiosaur, which is possible, I would say more improbable, it's got to find a way to hibernate during the winter. Because guess what? It's in Scotland. In the Highlands, it's going to get cold. A giant reptile is not built to survive in a lake like that without freezing to death the moment it ends up in there. And speaking of, how could it have gotten in there? Well, there are plenty of ways in that regard. And that being, like, for all we know from the geological record, the way into the loch could have been a lot wider back in the day, and over time it got eroded, and there was a family of these creatures that just got caught in there enough to have a surviving breedable population. That's certainly possible from what I've seen of the geological records. But once again, I want this to be the one. I want this to be the one so bad, but I don't think it's a giant plesiosaur. I don't think it's a mosasaur or any other type of aquatic reptile or dinosaur or what have you. So I myself am ruling out the idea of a plesiosaur. Next up, we have a big old boy, as you can see there, and some of these photos are quite shocking. Just how big some of these fish are, because you forget. I mean, there's not really a lot of these around. As far as us in the West are concerned, like West America versus Western Europe. So what the heck is this thing? This, my friends, is the Wells catfish. This giant sucker can grow up to immense lengths. I'm talking, let me double check here, up to almost 10 feet long. So you see that sucker in the water and you go, and you're from afar. Well, that certainly looks like a giant creature. Could be anything for all I know. Definitely quite capable of being misreported as something else. However, against this idea is the fact that the Wells catfish, its range is in the British Isles, but it is not in Scotland. But could there be a population up there that we're just unaware of? Certainly. And I forgot to look up if the DNA sequencing that they did, the survey, found any catfish DNA. I'm sure there are smaller breeds in Scotland. Yes, in fact, I do know there are, but not the Wells catfish from what I can recall from everything. Next up, we have the mighty sturgeon. Now, this sucker, I laugh. I laugh because in cryptozoology, especially when it comes to lake monsters and sea monsters, you're going to hear the name sturgeon a lot. And rightly so, to an extent. Because sturgeons, well, just look at the sucker. Look how big he gets. It is, I think, up to 15 feet, 16 feet sometimes is how big some of them get. And I've heard reports of even larger. That, no, I remember. It's actually up to 23 feet was the largest ever recorded. That was like in the 1800s. And I think Russia at the time. You're going to tell me you see that from afar in a lake and you don't immediately assume monster. I'm here to tell you, I am assuming monster. Because, I mean, just look at that sucker. Sturgeon are some of the largest fish in the world. They've got that bony plating on the back that kind of looks like a frill or a flipper or something like that, that seemingly would come from a large aquatic reptile of some sort. So it'd be super easy to misidentify that with what people would really want it to be, which in this case would be Plesiosaur, so on and so forth. So I do lend credibility to this. There are sturgeon that are found in Loch Ness. So I put this as highly plausible as a way people could misidentify the creature in the lake. Next up, for those of you wondering, you went. Sorry, I have to double check something to make sure. Okay, we're good. Christian, who the heck is this? You went from plesiosaurs to catfish to sturgeon to this loon. And let me tell you, this guy is a complete loon, and I love studying him. This is Aleister Crowley. For those of you who didn't just gasp and like, who the heck is Aleister Crowley? Well, let me enlighten you. This man is a Western mystic who, an occultist who created a bunch of different forms of different magical theologies, the religion of Thelema, and he's a horrible person. I mean, there's no way, there's no other way to say it. He is an evil man by definition. In fact, one of the things people used to call him was the wickedest man in the world because he would do depraved things. He would have wild orgies. He would go through sexual acts that most of us would kind of frown upon. But why I bring up Aleister Crowley, and it's pronounced Crowley and not Crowley from what I remember correctly, is that at one point in time, he had a residence at Loch Ness, and it is claimed that he was the one who created the creature in question based off of reading older texts like what was written about St. Columba. Now, Christian, how the heck could this man create a giant lake monster? Well, let me help you. Have you ever heard of what a tulpa is? Tulpa comes from more Eastern ideas and mysticism and mythologies that Crowley definitely studied a lot of. And in fact, if you look into what he does with Jack Parsons and stuff like that, Jack Parsons being one of the people behind our rocket and jet engines, if I remember correctly, a total weirdo as well, a psycho, really, both of them. They attempted at one point in time to create a woman out of just their minds. Essentially, a tulpa is the idea that if you or enough people come along and concentrate your thoughts, you can create a being from the energy of your thoughts. There's a lot more nuance in there, and definitely tulpas would be something I'd like to discuss on either the paranormal or the weird and the unexplained. I can go more in depth there with you all. But Crowley is said to have imagined the creature and given it life. Now, this, of course, involves a lot of magic, which we would definitely frown upon in the Christian faith. This being a rejection of creation itself, trying to impose your own will upon creation versus working with the natural energies and resources left behind by creation. And Crowley most definitely had no love for the church. He had no love for anything that restricted what he did. Was it do what thou wilt was one of his main mottos at that point. And yeah, do what thou wilt. He is a very complicated figure. He is someone we are most definitely, I don't think I have him as the first one for what we're doing, but he's going to be on a poll at some point in time for discussing his life is going to be insane. This man, while not a good man by any stretch of the imagination, is certainly an interesting man. So do I think that he created the tulpa and put it in Loch Ness? Not really. Tulpas are something that I kind of go back and forth on whether it's possible. Do I think humans have that much power over creation to bring something into this world? It's possible. I'm not willing to take a bullet for it, but that's a good man, Aleister Crowley. I'm going to get away from him for a second and just move back all the way here because there's a couple of smaller stuff that don't really require a picture. Of other potential things of what could cause sightings of the Loch Ness monster, those just being boat wakes. Now, for those of you who've never been a lake or the ocean in your entire life, what this means is that when a boat moves along the water, it creates waves and wakes in its passing. And sometimes, based on the water, based on the weather, temperature, so on and so forth, these wakes can seem to last a lot longer than normal, can take on different shapes that make people go, whoa, that seemed like something was moving in the water. And it's certainly plausible. Someone can look at that and go, that looks, could that be a creature of some sort? And they fill in their mind, they create to fill in gaps there and say, well, I saw this, but I really saw this. And their mind, they're not trying to lie to themselves, but it ends up happening like that anyways. So this is something I can definitely see being something that could cause a misidentification. But as for all of them or most of them, you'd have to be for it to keep happening. I don't buy it one bit, but I definitely do think it is the cause of some of the sightings. Next up, trees and branches. Now, this sounds silly until you see a tree or branch in the water yourself, and you wonder, that thing bobbing in the water, what the heck is that? And it's moving towards me. I better get the heck out of Dodge. And it's so easy for when you're swimming or when you're on the shores of a lake or what have you, and you see something in the distance, like continually head up, head down, what seems to be a moving creature, until it gets closer and you recognize, oh, well, this weird shape was just a giant log or something like that just happened to fall into the water, and it's buoyant enough to where it pokes up, but it's also sinking because of the weight it has, bringing it down. And it can easily be something you go, oh, wow, is that a creature of some sort? So I give a little credence to this too, as something that could be misidentified as a giant lake monster. If your eyes aren't as good as they should be, like mine, it'd be super easy to make this mistake. Now, next up on our list, we have a more fantastical option. That, of course, being the majestic and wondrous Kelpie. Now, a Kelpie, for those of you unaware, is a figure from Scottish folklore. It's essentially a shape-shifting spirit. Sometimes they're able to take this human form and just say, mess with people and draw men towards them, kind of like a siren, and they drown people. Sometimes they turn into a shape of a horse. That's why sometimes people have seen sightings of a horse. So people, that makes them think of the idea of the mythology behind a Kelpie. And what happens sometimes is like this, and that each user, whatever it is, it's an Irish thing, is they'll let people get on their backs, but sometimes, depending on the mythologies, they get too sticky and keep the porcelain on them. Then they drown them in the water and eat them. Now, Kelpies they're not exactly members of the fair folk. The fair folk being, for those of you not in the know, your elves, your sprites, your pixies, so on and so forth, your fairies. And I use the term fair folk because if you describe them in any other way, according to the mythologies, if you say they're beautiful, if you say they're ugly, well, they think both are an insult, because if you describe one as beautiful, but you don't describe the rest of them as, they're going to come and hit you and kill you or mess with you. Keep you alive is probably the worst thing that's going to happen to you, because death would be a lot quicker in some of the mythologies. So the general idea behind that is just call them fair, because if all of them are fair, you defer to them as such. You're not favoring one over the other. Now, Kelpies, like I said, are not always associated with, they're kind of like by association in the fact that they're a mythological figure. So they may be members of the fair folk, and depending on what mythology you're looking at. But the general idea is they're a shapeshifter. They have this presence about themselves that they'd be the perfect little trickster to. And I think, in fact, if you read Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the work that J.K. Rowling did, if I remember correctly, the Kelpie is mentioned there, and it's also mentioned as being what is in Loch Ness, as it just the particular Kelpie in question, just kind of like screwing with people. So it turns into this giant snake-like figure, then it turns into its regular form. Then when they try and find it, it just disappears. So I think that's just funny. I'm not sold on this. I'd have to believe in the fact that there's a Kelpie to begin with. So probable, not exactly my main suspect in most regards. So, Christian, you've gone through a lot of things. What do you actually think about what this creature is? Well, let me present my final option to you, which is why I saved it for last. And that, of course, if you'll remember, we had the giant eel as a potential suspect for who or what the Loch Ness monster could be. Now, why this over everything else? Well, eels are still some of the most mysterious creatures we have on this planet. To this day, the last time I looked up, we don't know how eels breed, especially your more common eels that you're going to see in our rivers or lakes or oceans, because they're in different stages of their lives. Eels are very mysterious creatures because of just what we don't know about them. Even though we've known about them for years, plenty of people, eat them. Plenty of people try to figure them out. They have attempted to breed them in captivity and have failed miserably because we just don't understand them in that way. Science has just not reached that point. So eel, Loch Ness, why do you think that is? Well, it certainly fits some of the profiles. You have a long serpentine figure. You look at an eel, you're going to think, oh, unless you know exactly what it is, oh, that's some kind of snake, right? But then you get closer and go, oh, that's an eel. Easy enough to misidentify. You've got a very long neck that could be seen if it came out of the water. Now, this does not apply to the ones we see on land, so I will give you that. If those accounts can be trusted, that seems to fit more the plesiosaur profile than it does the giant eel. But once again, that's if we can trust those, and I've mentioned my doubts on some of them. But I've also mentioned I might support them too. So that's the most infuriating thing about this whole ordeal is that idea of we don't know for sure. And as someone who likes concrete things, this is the most maddening thing in the world. It's like, why? Why can't we know what you are? Explain yourself to me, please. But back onto the topic of an eel. What it does, eels most likely very rarely come to the surface. So that explains especially why now we don't get as many photos of them like we did apparently back in the day. And you've really got to stretch it and say, oh, people were taking photos of the Loch Ness monster every day. It's not happening. Like, people spend their entire lives looking over the loch and see absolutely nothing. And an eel, like I said, being a very secretive creature, would keep to the depths for the most part. It would explain some of the sonar pictures we've got and the pings we've gotten from there, describing a larger creature that registers on the radar 1 second and sonar and then is gone the next because they just move that swiftly. It would also explain the presence of a lot of that unidentified eel DNA that was found in that survey of the loch. So that's where I'm putting my money at. If there is a creature in the loch that is unknown to science, my money is on giant eel. Not taking a bullet for that at any point in time, maybe a non-fatal bullet wound. But that's where I rest. And another reason I should have brought this up earlier of why I don't think it's a plesiosaur type monster, or it was at one point in time, but I believe it's gone extinct, is the fact that in order to have a giant creature like that in the loch, there needs to be a large enough breeding population. And the larger a population you have, the more likely you're going to get spotted. And I think if this was at one point in time a more plesiosaur-like figure, or some people think it's a giant seal of some sort, or a giant invertebrate like a sea slug, sorry, that was an ant that just got on me there. A real creature you should definitely be worried about, especially me, if you don't want to go to the hospital. If there is such a large thing, it needs to have food that it can reliably eat, which there are a lot of fish in the loch, enough to survive for a giant pod of plesiosaurs. I don't know if that's a proper term for a group that is for whales. Possibly. I mean, there's been a bit of overfishing, especially in recent years, so that could explain why a colony of these creatures, a pod of these creatures, would die off. So you need a breeding population. You need to have food as well. And for both of those things to happen, I doubt it a lot for a creature like a plesiosaur. Now, once again, we know very little about how they actually interacted with the world. We can only guess based off the fossil record we have and the scenes we find them in, and how we're restructuring what they might have looked like at best. Because guess what? I mean, unless there's some out there right now, we don't know what they actually look like 100%. That's why there's still raging debate in the scientific world of how many feathers do dinosaurs do they actually have? Because we know for sure most of them did, but like, were they all over? Were they just over a certain portion of their body? So on and so forth. But I think my eel, what's the word I'm looking for here, that I'm putting up as my candidate. I'll put it that way for what the Loch Ness monster could be. I think it makes a lot more sense. Eels definitely live on fish, so they're going to be less likely to be seen. They'd be strong enough. Most eels, I forget lifespans, but they'd live fairly long enough to pass on their genes and have enough of a population where even if stuff was overfished in the loch, there'd be enough for them to eat, enough of them to breed and continue on the legacy. That's why I say Loch Ness monster, if it is real, which I want it to be, but I cannot prove. So I think at the end of the day, if we're going to say this creature is conclusively real, I suppose it depends on whether or not you believe the eyewitnesses. So that's that. That's what I think. But what about you guys? What do you think about all this? My dear listeners and viewers, is the Loch Ness monster real? Is it a hoax? A tulpa? Something else? I mean, we didn't even touch everything the Loch has to offer tonight. So let us know in the comments below if there's something you'd like us to do a follow-up on. Next time, however, on Friday Night Frights, you and I, and whoever comes with us along the way, guest host or co-host wise, we will be doing a very special episode on the paranormal, where we will be discussing the myths, legends, and possible truths of the dreaded vampire. So remember, it's a terrible world out there, but in the midst of this, we are all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.